Hello, I'm Nicholas Gianassi.
And I'm Fletcher Nugent. And today we are joined by a good friend of mine, Graham Anderson. Graham's got an awesome story. He's also the only man under the age of 70 in the country called Graham. So congratulations.
Strictly reserved for old men and print directors of newspapers. It seems.
Yeah, I think it's a wise name for sure. And knowing you, Graham actually reached out and wanted to jump on the podcast, and I was really excited personally when he did because he's got such a unique view. He's a very intelligent guy. He's got some cool stories as well. So we're really looking forward to settle any confusion with the outfits as well. I was actually wearing navy blue first. So
I can get a shirt on if you want. I can get a blue shirt on if that helps you boys. I don't think I've got those pants, but
yeah, it's just so the audience knows. All right. Well, yeah, I'll start with a little bit how we met. I've only known you for how long? Well,
like a year, maybe. It's I think it was June last year.
June
yeah.
9,
we
10.
did the partner course together.
Yeah.
And just drawn to each other initially, like just before it all kicked off, started chatting.
Yeah, for sure. When we met on the Vipassana, I think you actually sparked the conversation. We ended up chatting for probably half an hour, 40 minutes before we had to be silent for 10 days. And yeah, I just saw what a cool guy. You actually told me about something that happened to you, which I found really fascinating, which was the motorbike accident. And I think that would be a really good place to start with this podcast, because it sounds like you built a lot of resilience, got a lot of wisdom from that experience, and it's a very unique experience. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and sort of your journey with introspection as well? I think that would be a good place to start, mate.
Yeah, mate, I definitely kick into that straight away. I think really good place to start. But I wanted to say, really cool to be able to go on the podcast. I think it's so cool that I just asked and you're like, yeah, sure, let's do it. Big fan of you, Fletch, and Nick. Like, heard great things about you.
And you, bro.
Rattles on about you as a good mate. Like, love to meet him. Here we are. Awesome to be on the podcast. To start with the bike crash, really good starting point, particularly because listening to you guys' last podcast, you're talking about death and the motorbike crash. Like, spoiler alert, it resulted in me dying a couple of times and coming back. And I think I don't think I have much of a perspective, much of a solid perspective on anything. I think that's why I am such a good person to talk about everything, because I know that there is so many unknown things. With the bike crash, like having a perspective on death definitely gives me a uniqueness, I think. I don't know. Yeah, like how to start with the bike crash. Like, how much context would you guys like to hear?
Well, Nick wants to know how old you were and maybe just take us through the night.
How old were you? What bike were you riding? How did you crash? And just take us through the experience.
The series of events.
Nice. Yeah, really good. Okay, let's get into him. I was 21 and I was in third year of mechanical engineering at University of Queensland in Brisbane. I was living in a house with some really good mates, great house, like really social, and every part of life came together for this bike crash to happen. I think I was studying really hard, like just going from social week with my mates into an exam block, studying really hard for this exam that I'm just unprepared for. So I was stressed. I was sitting down all day. I just needed a release. So I usually go to the gym to get my release. Like, I was going to the gym twice a day. I was up to 100 kilos, like really fit, really healthy. Went for this bike ride and I don't remember much of it. This is the last point that I remember is studying. So I got this little Kawasaki Ninja 250cc kind of mini sports bike. That's what I was riding. I always had. I've been riding since I was 16. It was my main form of transport. Always so careful. Like, I'll kit up with the leathers, boots, like top grade helmet, everything. Never split lanes. always so careful because I knew how dangerous it was. I've been riding bikes since I was like 10 years old on the farm, dirt bikes. So competent, really competent. Basically went around this roundabout. It was 22nd of June, the darkest day of the year, really cold, rainy, like mid of winter. Went around this roundabout 8 p.m. at night on my way to the gym, I think, and just went up over this hill and down the other side. And I don't remember any of this, so this is all just like hearsay. People, this is probably what happened. Is I went over the hill. It curves down to the right, like down real sharp, up over down, and always take this track to uni. Go over it. For whatever reason, I just go straight over it and straight into a tree. Just bang, smack into a. It wasn't even thick. It was like a quarter of a telegraph pole, but probably bent when I hit it, but not enough to break. And hit it with my wrist, fractured and torn ligaments in there and bones. Hit it with my collarbone after that. That fractured and went into my lung, punctured the lung and filled the other one with blood eventually. So then with that impact, twisted around and smacked my head in the gutter. On the twist, I fractured 4 vertebrae in my neck as well. Smacked my head on the gutter and it fractured through the helmet. So that was just blood everywhere, blood out of my ears, just filled the helmet with blood. So there I was just lying on the ground completely. Heart went into arrhythmia. So effectively dead. Like if I just stayed in that mode, I wouldn't have got the blood to my brain, wouldn't have been able to function, would have died. Heart was effectively stopped. And I was just lucky that someone heard the crash. It was dark street, like one street light. Someone heard the crash and came out, and her husband was a nurse for 20 years previously and now a psychologist. So he knew what to do. He gave me a sternum rub, like tried to jolt me. Didn't work. So then I think he gave me a few compressions and that jolted my heart back, and lungs were out of action. So whatever breath I could draw in through the tiny space was able to sustain me until the ambulance and fire brigade got there. And that was like 5 minutes. So I was pretty lucky that was so quick. And it was like credit to the guys that got me, Dominic and Gabriel. Dominic was just onto it, really keen to get people there to help me.
You still know him?
Yeah. Oh, really funky story. I actually knew them previously. I'm not saying in another life. I'm saying when I was young. Wow. That we had film stuff happening on our farm. Like they did a few films, and Dominique was a location manager. So she stopped me running around the set every now and then, and was going to put me in a movie, put me in as an extra at some point. Wow. So she knew my parents, not very well, but when we came to see them and to thank them, she was like, Anderson. And we gave them avocados because that's what we can do. It's our thing. We grow avocados, so you can't give someone anything for saving their firstborn, but a bag of avocados goes a stretch of the way.
It goes pretty.
So, she was like, avocados, Anderson, I know you guys. Yeah. And Gabriel, just, of course, I love him to bits, and my dad and mum do too. And Dominic, I go around dinner with them every now and then. I haven't for a year or so, and I'm real sad about that. I gave him a call. They gave me a call the other day, a couple of months ago now. Yeah, do keep in touch. Awesome people, of course. Love them.
Absolutely. I mean, they saved your life, and
yeah,
you gave them a bag of avocados. That's unreal. So take us to. They've obviously kept you alive, Dominic and Gabriel, and that's happened. And then you've been taken to the hospital. What was you've obviously survived, clearly. As you said, spoiler alert, you're here today. It's a wonderful thing. I'm very grateful for that. I'm sure you are too. What was the recovery like? Take us through when, you know, your parents kind of getting to the hospital and then from then on.
Yeah. So in the hospital, it was a struggle. I died again in the ambulance. Once I was in the hospital, they were like, this guy's done. He's a veggie, like cooked. Brain damage as bad as it can be. Like I was just one little point above a rock, like no function. They thought I was done. So they rang up my parents and said, come and say, like, we'll try and take him out of the coma. I was in a coma straight away. They kept me in it. And they said, we'll take him out to like maybe say goodbye. So that was them coming up, and they got my brother there as well. And my best mate like zoomed in from Millmerran, like out west, on his bike to be there. And I just kind of made a really good recovery. Like, as I said, I was going gym twice a day, really healthy, in a good social setting, a lot of connection. I was just really lucky to come out of it. So came out of it okay after 3 days. Like my dad didn't sleep, just sat there holding my hand. That gets me like the most out of everything. Really like awesome thing. And after 3 days, I was out of it, and then like in intensive care for those 3 days and a bit, and then in a normal ward for like a week, and discharged after that. But just really speedy recovery. They were like, was he on drugs? Like the kind of recovery I'd come out would be representative of someone coming out of drugs into like normality. But like never, if I was riding, never, ever, never would. And my brother knew that. He was like, not a chance. Like he would not. Just ridiculously sensible to a fault, which is kind of, an aspect of why the crash happened, because it's just way too sensible down the line, needed a release. And out of the recovery, Nick, did you want to?
I was just going to say, that really touched me actually when you were talking about your dad and that. But what I was going to ask was, you explained the crash as somebody else has told you, so you don't remember that, I'm assuming?
No, not at all. No.
Remember the days that you were out?
No, not at all. It was just all blank from sitting at the desk before going riding to waking up in the hospital. Waking up in the hospital, just like tubes everywhere, like down my throat, down my nethers, like in my armpits, just wires and tubes everywhere. I still remember like the vision, just opened my eyes, and my mum leaned across and she's like, Mac, that's like what my family call me, Macco, you've had a crash. And I was just like, and just went back into the coma. That was like them taking me out of it, and then just straight back into it. And it's just like, that's all I remember.
Once you came out of the coma and you said you had a speedy recovery, I mean, obviously you've still got a broken back, you've still got a fractured skull, and, you know, I'm assuming your lungs were still needing some treatment. How long was the recovery from that point until you were out of hospital, basically?
All gradual, like 2 years at a stretch. 2 years is when I got most, like, maximum brain recovery. So like the brain damage was the worst of it, because the physical body, like, you can survive okay, but you just need your brain function. That's so important. 2 years was the brain function recovery at maximum.
Just like, is this, when you say brain function, are you just talking about actual to be able to move, or is you talking about memory, or everything?
Cognition was the most important thing, like abstraction and comprehension. They were the most important things for me. But physically moving, like repairs physically, bones and muscles, about 6 months I felt okay. Like I was going for walks and like kind of stumbling jogs. 6 months. After maybe a year, I was happy with where my brain was, and I went on an international trip and like wasn't meant to drink for 2 years to let the brain recovery happen. But I did start drinking again after a year, because I came from like not being able to form a sentence with my brain function through to where I am now. And I was happier when I wasn't able to form a sentence. It's really quite funky that intelligence, like intellect comprehension, is a struggle. It's life's simpler back when I had brain damage.
There's
Not
actually,
to say I would go back there. I think that contentment is much higher with comprehension, but happiness was much more when I was on the simpler version of myself.
there's actually a spiritual story about someone who loses his memory and is so happy. And then I'm basically making it short. And then they take him to every healer, every doctor, and they heal him so he gets his memory back. And he ends up chasing the doctor around because he spoils his happiness. Once
Imagine.
he gets his full functioning mind back.
So, Hammy, I remember when you told me the story when we first met, and one of the things I personally found so intriguing was your ability to kind of, in that short period of time, articulate the ascension or progression of your cognition back to a standard that you could, I suppose, recognize or relate with before the accident. So could you talk us through that process of progress and what it was like, kind of, I suppose, because it's very difficult for people to get out of their being and out of their head and out of that space, but sounds like that was actually removed from you and then you saw it evolving back. So could you give us a little insight into that progress and how that unfolded from how you observed it?
Yeah, I think if I could rephrase it, so I'm sure I've got the essence of it. I think my comprehension, which was essentially my thinking mind, able to comprehend and analyze things, was taken away. So I was left with maybe what is my simpler self, what is my true self, without trying to put a intellectual overlay on it. Is that essentially what you're saying, and how that like overlay came back?
I've got a question, if I could jump in there, because I'd love you to answer Fletcher's question. If you could just also answer, how do you see the two? Well, you obviously just said when the thinking mind was taken away from you, your true essence was there. How do you see the two?
Yeah, I see the two. The way that I explained that is not necessarily how I would say that my thoughts on it are. Like that. That's not how my expression there was more to understand Fletcher's question. How I see the two parts of myself, not as I would usually articulate, is the way that I expressed it there was like as a effort to understand Fletcher's question. But the way that I understand my two selves is unconscious and conscious. So my unconscious self is as I am with my ego. My ego's there as I act, as well to my physiological needs, which is like hormone releases, like oxytocin, drives, chases for endorphins, cortisol, all those hormones, and how I react to them. That's what I term my unconscious self. I think my ego is mainly the mechanism of those actions. My conscious self, the other part of it, is what I conceptualize my frontal lobes to be acting for. I think the desires that I chase with my consciousness is the actions are driven by my frontal lobes, and those conscious actions are like a flow on from the ego. So it is ways that I act that aren't immediate reactions to a stimulus. So I think about an action before I take it. Like I'm thinking, oh, this candle, I've got a candle here. I'm like, oh, it smells nice. I'm glad they've got it. I'm going to buy another candle. That kind of conscious action. I don't know if that answered your question.
It's. I've got so many questions for you actually, but you can carry on with Fletcher's.
All right. Sorry, I'm going to have to ask you again, Fletch, what you asked before.
It was, quite straightforward. If I could put it simply, what was it like observing your progression of comprehension coming back in?
Yeah, fantastic. Very curious. As I started with struggling comprehension and abstraction, I struggling with sentences. I was connecting quite well with simpler people. I was connecting with everyone. I was connecting with everyone on a simple level, which I think might be ego connections. I do think that ego is a mechanism for connection, and my ego was there. It was easily able to connect to everyone. Everyone had a connection for me. As I developed my comprehension and abstraction abilities, those connections kind of dropped away. It was difficult. It was more of a struggle to connect with people, but I was able to connect with certain people on a deeper level. It wasn't as satisfying. I wasn't able to flop around from person to person and just like have a good time and get those oxytocin hits. Like oxytocin was a bit more of a chase as I developed, as my brain power returned.
I've got questions for you, Graham.
Yeah.
Because what you just explained there, it seems almost like the way you explained the ego consciousness and the subconscious is almost how I would see it the other way around.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Like the ego sits in the more conscious mind, or yeah. But I suppose what Hammy, you're doing a really good job of explaining it from an intellectual perspective, and I think a way that perhaps we can put it maybe a little bit simpler, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's reaction and responsibility, which we've spoken about before. Like you were saying, how the unconscious mind just reacts to stimulus, and then the conscious mind then thinks before the reaction. It comprehends the situation, analyzes the situation, and then it can then act from there.
That's exactly, like, really good.
The ego sitting in there.
Yeah, so if you can clarify, well, perhaps let's take a step back, because I know that ego gets thrown around a lot, and I don't think on this podcast we've really defined it succinctly from our perspective, and it'd be nice to hear what your perspective of ego is as well. And it can be a little bit hard to define, I think. So maybe we can try our best so our audience gets an understanding of what we're actually talking about when we do say ego from both perspectives.
For me, the ego, it's been a struggle for so long. Like, I've been in spiritual settings a lot of my life since high school. Like, a lot of my mates are very spiritual. I don't term myself as spiritual as some, but there's definitely an aspect to me. And I've always struggled with the definition of ego. The definition of ego and the definition of love are two huge struggles for me, have been huge struggles for me. I think people, sorry, Nick?
You explain why they've been a struggle as well.
I can definitely explain the love aspect and why it's been a struggle, but the ego, I think it's been such a struggle because I have heard it in so many different definitions. So I would hear it in a certain context and it's used in another context that's different. And I'm like, I can't reconcile those two definitions. So I think you're right, Fletch, to say that people do have different, I don't know if you said people have different definitions of ego, but the definition of ego is a struggle. For me, the ego is simply the reaction to a stimulus. So an immediate reaction is the ego's acting, like an animal would, like a lizard sees a fly and eats it. Like, that's the ego in my mind. The action that it takes is the ego's action. Like in a social setting, if I extrapolate to that if there's an angry fella in front of you, you have the fight or flight response. That's the ego's response. And I think the consciousness is an intermediate between the response and the stimulus. I think as the conscious expands, then the response and the stimulus get further apart, and the conscious is the action there. A definition for ego is just that simple: is action from stimulus.
Yeah, it's
That's fascinating for me, because that's the opposite of what I see ego is, believe it or not. Because when you see an animal that's just reacting to its environment, I don't see a dog having an ego.
would you say that's more it's nature?
It's more its nature, but it's, for me, ego is an identification with a separate self-identity.
Yeah, correct. And I guess I see it in terms of the ego is born from the thinking self and the thinking mind. So the thinking mind and the mind are actually one and the same, but they're also separate. So I like to think or experience the thinking mind as a behavior of the mind. And what happens with the thinking mind and the ego is it's constantly affirming and forming itself. And I experienced that in many times throughout meditation and many times in contemplation and observation, realizing the nature of the ego rather than trying to define exactly what ego is, if that makes sense. So, for example, how my ego would form was that these thought patterns in my head, or these karmas, these actions, these habits that were ingrained, were constantly using energy from within myself to form a sense or an identity of myself, which I would there live from. So one of the insights I had was I was sitting in meditation.
Which is separating you from your true nature.
That's correct. It's obstructing you from seeing things as they are, because you're projecting an identity of how you want a certain situation or not want a certain situation to be.
Mm-hmm.
So to take it back a step, it's actually understanding the nature of ego, which can be very difficult if you haven't experienced stepping out of it. Now, I don't want to say it's that black and white. You know what I mean? I don't think any of this stuff is black and white. And I think that's why it's really important to get different understandings and different definitions, because what you're saying about reaction and responsibility, which is how I've termed it, what you said is very true. But I don't necessarily say that being the ego. I think the ego is the thinking self continually surviving. So the example I was going to give is I was in meditation and I was observing myself and the thought pattern and what the thought pattern was doing. The thought pattern was projecting myself in a future situation. And the thought pattern was then trying to identify what I would be wearing in that future situation, and then how I would be acting with people in that future situation. So it was projecting. And then I would therefore, in that moment from now, make conscious or unconscious steps towards that action. So to me, that was the ego in play. And it's like the mind loose off the chain, the thinking behavior of the mind loose off the chain.
Which comes back to time.
Yep.
Because we're the only species on the planet with ego, because we have the neocortex, and the ego needs time. So just following what you said, you were in time. You wasn't here. You were thinking of a future event, or most people live in the past situation, because time and mind, they need each other. And we're the only species that is time bound.
Mm. Yeah, exactly.
So you say your term of the ego is, Nick, would it be in the neocortex, as you say, like it's flipped around? So the ego is that thinking part that acts between the stimulus and no. That's my definition. Is the ego in the neocortex and it's the thinking runaway?
Yes, because you've done Vipassana, for example, and I don't know what your experience was. I'd love to hear your experience. But if you were to get to a point where you could observe the thinking mind, who's observing? So that in my understanding, that observing consciousness is the true essence of who you are. The thinking mind that creates dramas and wants certain things and is always chasing after stimulus for the five senses, that's ego.
Yeah, I get you.
It sees itself as a separate self from the whole. The more meditation takes you away from the thinking mind, the more unified we feel with the whole.
It's a living, the ego is a living
entity,
thing.
yeah.
It's a living entity within you. And it's only lives from my personal experience, which I always try and speak from. It only lives within your mind, within the thinking habits and of your mind. And there's, the examples in meditation, your thinking mind is like a monkey just running around. And then, a practice in meditation can be to bring that monkey to be sitting back on a stool, for example. And that's the continual practice. And by doing that, you hit this point of focus where perhaps you can separate yourself from that and transcend the thinking mind. So that, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's a little example.
I didn't know what I was going to ask you, and so many questions have come up. One question I'd like to ask, which is still connected to what we're talking about, is how do you view life and how do you view death now after the accident and before the accident? Has it changed at all? So growing up, how did you ever reflect on death? And I'd like to see how you viewed life and death growing up. And has that changed since the accident? And do you view it differently now?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Death was reflected on death previously. I had a really hard gap year where I worked on the farm, like on a family farm. And just like, I put the expectation on myself to work really hard and just insanely so, like superhuman kind of stuff. And it took a toll on me. Like I was like working hard labor by myself in a field for like 12 hours a day sometimes. Didn't take a day off in the year. It was intense and too much for a human mind, really. I reflected a lot in that time. Like a lot of the time I'll just go and sit on a hill in the afternoons by myself and reflect on what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. It formed, like in that time, it formed a lot of my perceptions on life, and I did contemplate death. Like I contemplated suicide in that year, and I kind of I was comfortable with death at that time. I was comfortable with that. The reason that I didn't was mainly...
I'm sorry to jump in there, but I mean, I'm sorry to keep asking questions, but is that because were you not happy then? Or was that because you pushed yourself too hard in work that you were comfortable with death? Or
Yeah, both. I was just not happy. I didn't have I wasn't contented. I didn't have the chemicals that I needed in my body to be content. And I was depressed. That was where the contemplation came from, for sure. But like contemplating it was fine. The reason not was because the people that you leave behind. Like I cared a lot for my family and my friends, and I still maintain that death is not so bad. It's the people you leave behind that it sucks for. So the ones that we should feel sorry for are the people that left behind, not the ones that have died. Death is fine.
what do you think
It's
happens when you die?
nothing. I don't think anything happens. Not that is linked. Well, this is the thing. It's for me. For me, nothing happens. The person that I am, the soul that I am, nothing happens. But I could totally see.
Meaning what, Graham? Like when you say nothing happens, do you believe that the consciousness that is giving life to your body now just this extinguishes, or do you believe that it moves on, takes form, there's an afterlife? What do you believe with the spirit? Because you didn't use that terminology. You said the spirit or the soul.
I do, yeah, I definitely can and do use that terminology. I just think the soul and spirit is extinguished. Consciousness is extinguished. It's switched off. But there's
We only have one.
nothing. What's that?
You believe we only have one life?
Yes, I believe that I only have one life. I think I am unique in the way that I view the world. And I did ayahuasca, and that's the one thing that I got out of it, is that I'm a weird little unit, like just a strange thing.
Can I say something? I'm really intrigued in this conversation because you're actually not on your own. I think, and this is my outlook on things and my experience with dealing with people every day, and my own outlook. I was atheist for 2 years. And the more that I've researched in also like conspiracies and things like that, I believe that there's more atheists right now than ever before. And there's more people who believe that we only get one life, and when you die, that's it. And a lot of my friends who I've worked with believe that. And I think that's actually an intentional conscious programming by the scientific world and so on and so forth. We don't have to go down that road. But
we'll just jump in there if that's all right.
We can jump in there because when I'm listening to you speak, you've mentioned a couple of times about chemical reactions. Do you see this existence as just being a random chemical, event that happens, and when a baby's born, it just has consciousness? I mean, where do you think the consciousness comes from in a newborn baby, and where do you think your likes, dislikes, and personality and whatever comes from?
It's a tough one. I don't, like most of my theories, I don't think I have a solid base for them. But I think anyone that doesn't really understand much, because there's just like so much unknown that it's impossible to say for sure. But the best that I've come up with is looking through evolution and seeing how, like, we go from cells into an organism, into animals, to humans. And that process, that's what I found, what I found all of my beliefs on. I don't see a way that, sorry, go Nick.
I'm so sorry. Do you believe we evolved from monkeys?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that, yeah, I don't see how consciousness comes up, but the best shot that I have at it is that it is a chemical interaction in the brain that's come through evolution.
I really like.
We could go anywhere here, couldn't we?
Yeah, but what I really, really like about this conversation, which I want to have to say, which I think the world really needs more of, is really open dialogue. And that was one of the, like, when you said you wanted to go on the podcast, I was really, really happy because I respect you a lot, as I've said, and I think you're very intelligent. But what I really like about your perspective as well is you acknowledge what perhaps they're founded on and what they're rooted in, which is really important because a lot of people have no idea how they shape the world, how they see the world. But not only that, is that you are willing to explore and try all these different things, like Vipassana, ayahuasca, and you trust your own experience. You experience what you experience and you walk away from that, and that's what you experience. For me, that is exactly what the world needs. And that is how anyone should approach their practice and their perspectives on life, because that is how the truth, and this is the Satya podcast, whatever the truth may be, evolves and brings to light and comes forth.
And can I ask a question on that? Because you've obviously done ayahuasca and things like this. A question I have there is, when Fletch said what did you say then? You said he's tried all these things and then he's truthful with his experience.
Yes, yeah, correct.
Do you be honest with that, or do you try and analyze what's happening in that experience based on the knowledge you know?
Mm. As consciously as I'm aware, I try and separate what my preconceptions are to what if I do add on to my beliefs, I try and separate my preconceptions of it. But I think that it's impossible to separate entirely preconceptions from beliefs. So the person that I've become is because of the person that I was, and those preconceptions will form as I am. And I acknowledge that. It's like why I think it's so difficult to nail down into the simplicity of it all, because preconceptions are always in the way, like clouding what the truth is. And as you say, Fletch, it's so important to live your truth. Like if I go into a society framework, you look at narcissism is probably the biggest detriment to societal health in people. It's just living your truth. Like that's what I found. It's so important for people to live what experience they experience, and to be told otherwise is so dangerous.
Yeah, correct, for sure.
I just said ego then, because narcissism is the ego.
Yeah, ego gone wild. But I think you as a person as well and why it's, again, very refreshing to have you on the podcast is because I do see you from my perspective, again, as a spiritual person, but in the respect of, remember,
what does that mean to you?
Here we go. So I remember Nick's wife, Danielle, who's been a great help to me. She said to me, being spiritual is just being kind. And you're a very kind person. And I think that's why it's so refreshing for me that you have these perspectives that you're solid in, which aren't necessarily akin to, say, your spiritual wizard that you hear speaking on YouTube and Facebook at the moment. But you live this life where you're kind to people, you have, brilliant conversations, you act in that way. And I think that's what the world needs more of. So I just want to throw that in there because I think that we can really overcomplicate things, and I love having these in-depth conversations, and I think we should continue down the path. But at the end of the day, that if you're just kind to people, we're going to both experience a pretty similar reality, which is mutually beneficial for all.
And he's bang on, he's right what he's saying, but it's very interesting because the way my mind works is absolutely spirituality is kindness. I get it. If you're a kind person, then you're doing the right thing. There's no doubt about that. But I still also, and I'm not the way I understand a spiritual perspective is do you believe that there is a spirit to us? I mean, one question I have for you is, do you believe in a God or a grand or an intelligence behind things, a creator, if you like?
Yeah, so cool. I struggled with it for so long. Read book upon book, lots of time just spent thinking on a hill. What's that?
When you say I've read book after book, what were you reading? What books were you reading on that?
What did I read? I read, can I bring up my Audible and just have a look-see?
Yeah, mate, I'd love to hear what you read.
We've actually, you do that, Hammy. We've actually, it's so funny, our relationship, because I've read a few books that he's also read. And I'm like, mate, I love this book. Like, this book's awesome, you should read. And he's like, yeah, I've read it. And I'm like, what'd you think? He's like, yeah, it's all right, but it doesn't really answer this question and that question. So I think The Power Now was one of them, which I think from memory you enjoyed, but we obviously got different things from it. Oh, there you go, mate, so much. The Man was also one that I loved, and you were like, nah, it's not for me.
I want to know what you love.
Yeah, tell us what
what do I got? Why We Sleep, which is like such a scientific outlay of sleep, and it just changed my life. And I used to just do 4 hours of sleep because I'm like, sleep's useless, whatever. Just overpower it with will.
What does he say?
No, can't do that. What did you say?
In that book, I'm not familiar with it. I'll definitely check it out. But what does he say in the book sleep is? I mean, we understand that every night we need to go to a different state of consciousness. And while we're in that state, the physical, mental body recharges. Does he go into what's actually going on when we sleep?
Not the answer that you want. No, not. I looked for that answer as well, and no, I'm like, why? Like, I know the essence of the question. I understand it, and he doesn't provide it. But physiologically, one of the functions is to replenish the brain fluid, and like that makes a hell of a lot of sense to me. Like, it stops the brain degrading, basically.
All that makes sense to me. But the reason why I asked that the way I did is it comes back again to a spiritual answer. Because if you look at our phone, when it starts to die, we plug it into a mains to recharge it so it performs optimally again. People take sleep for granted because it's just what we do. But sleep is an incredible thing. We are literally preparing ourselves every night comfortably to go into a completely different state of consciousness that is vital for optimal health. And
yeah, I think
we don't know, we can't explain it. It's a spiritual practice.
Like, looking at what happens if you don't have sleep, is you disconnect from reality. So essentially, sleep is your thread to reality. Like, without sleep, you don't have a reality.
And another question, I'm sorry, is when you say you disconnect from reality, who's the you you're referring to? What part of you is disconnected from reality?
The part that interacts, the part that controls the body. The part that controls the body.
Which is,
I don't know.
For you?
I think, so by my definition of ego and conscious, so ego on one side, conscious on the other, I think that the person is both of those, that I am both of those, and they interact together by my reality. Like, they interact together, and they are like, I won't have one without the other. I might have a diminished ego at times, but I always have it. Might have a diminished consciousness at times, but I always have it. They interact together, and they are the same person. I am that person. Yeah, it's difficult. It would be difficult for us to talk on ego and consciousness, I think, just because we do have different ways of going around it. I'm curious if anyone listening has similar thoughts on ego and consciousness.
You know what? There's something I would love to share. My auntie was dying of cancer, and I went round to her house once, and I shouted, "Auntie Claire," no answer. And I saw her basically unconscious. I thought she was dead. So I phoned the ambulance. They came round. She was in a coma for 3 days, and they gave her her last rites, and she basically died and came back. She didn't get brought back because they said they wasn't going to resuscitate her because she was already dying, but she was basically out. And when she came round, me and my brother were asking her, like, how, what happened? And she said, I don't remember anything after, I think she went to go to the bathroom or something, which was not but maybe 3 hours before or 2 hours before I found it. And she said, I don't remember anything. When I woke up, it was as if I'd woke up straight after then. I've got no recollection of how long I was out for. Now, Buddhist cosmology, they talk about different states of consciousness in this conversation. It's fascinating. And I got a lot because in one of the, I can't remember which realm it is, one of the realms that's higher than us, in between life cycles, they have a break of like 500 kalpas, and kalpas is an enormous length of time to us. But when they have incarnated into their next life again, those 500 kalpas, there's no recollection of being in non-existence, if you like, for that time. And the way they explain it, they say, if you go to sleep and have a really good night's sleep, or even if you sleep for like 13, 14 hours, if you wake up, you feel like you've had a long sleep. But if you, for example, put under anesthetic, the state of consciousness you go in, when you come out of it at the end of, like, say, an operation, your last memory is almost the second they put you under. There's no recollection of how long you've been out for. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is I'm thinking, you obviously had an experience like my auntie, where you obviously got out on your bike. That was your last memory. And then you remember coming around and your father was there and he's been with you for 3 days. Do you think there's a chance that you never actually died? Because even in like Hindu teachings, they say there's many stages to the soul leaving the body. I mean, you may have been, all your vital signs to the doctors may have suggested that you were dead. But do you believe that, do you think it's possible that you actually didn't die? So you never had a death experience? Or?
Yeah, like very, in terms of definition, consciously, I didn't die because I am still the same person that I was before. Physically, like the death, like heart stop, brain activity stop. Yes, that's death by a definition, but then consciously, essentially didn't die because I am the same person that I was.
What I'm getting at is, do you think that if you were to die fully today, do you feel like the experience may be different? And I'm just sharing this because I'll share how I see it. I mean, I see that there's a physical, chemical part of our existence, chemical reactions. There's an energy that moves the matter, but there's also an intelligence that directs what we do, directs the energy that moves the matter. So, there's so many testimonials of people who have died, and they all share a similar experience of leaving the body. Even people who just astral project as a practice say that they experience being outside of the body and have full panoramic awareness. Do you think that's possible, that if you were to die today, let's say, God forbid you don't, but that you would, that's a possibility? Or do you still feel that lights out, it's gone?
I think it's another thing for me. If someone else was to experience the same death as I did, they might have an experience. I think that I did not. I've never had any visuals and I can't visualize things in my mind. I've never had any visuals, no matter what I take. I can't do visuals. Like if that makes sense, I can't imagine things in my mind. I think that someone who might be able to imagine things has that mechanism. When they died, the same scenario as I did, they might have an out-of-body experience, or they might have a death experience.
So you can't.
Well, I suspect.
Graham.
Yeah, I suspect I just didn't, because I don't have that mechanism.
You don't have that now. You can't create a visualization.
No.
Wow, that's fun. And is that off the Graham?
No, always.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah. So it's why I say I'm a weird unit. Like I don't have an internal dialogue either. It's just a weird existence when I hear about other people's way of being.
Change the way you say it. I'm sorry I don't mean to correct you in any way, but rather than saying it's weird, say it's unique or it's a blessing.
Yeah. I guess it's the connotation that I have with weird. I'm very happy with weird. I love weird.
Yeah. Mate, you've been on the hot seat. Those
yeah.
questions. I don't even know.
Could go all day with someone like you.
Seriously, yeah. We've just like touched on one book that I read, and that's it.
You've only got a
mate,
yeah.
Mentally keeping track of the roads we've meant to have gone down, and we just gone
everywhere.
Well, maybe why don't we go into another book?
Yeah, you did get your Audible out. How about you?
Yeah. Hey, So Why We Sleep changed my life. Another one, what was it? I should be able to remember it because it did change my life. The Selfish Gene. The Selfish Gene. It outlays the logical process of evolution, like Darwin's theory of evolution, and it expands on it, just like taking logical steps forward, which I really appreciate. There's no assumptions. It's just this could be the logical way forward by probability. And it just keeps going, like takes society into account and everything. And Nick, you asked about, do I believe in God or a higher power? And the answer that I got from all my searchings was in that book. I don't know if it makes this connection, but it's what I connected from it. That our genes are essentially God. Our genes control us, and all the miracles and unexpected and incomprehensible things that happen in the world are our genes manipulating who we are and what we do. And by genes, I don't just talk humans, but I talk every living thing has genes, and by their desire to survive, they do these miracles and incomprehensible things.
What's that book called? The Selfish?
The Selfish Gene.
Oh, the Selfish.
Gene.
Yeah. So that book says that we are governed by our genes. That's fascinating. Yep. Bruce Lipton says the complete opposite, doesn't he?
Sort of. He goes into epigenetics. So my infant understanding of epigenetics is the activity that causes the cell to react in a certain way. And I think he speaks about consciousness from the perspective of consciousness actually being the download of information which influences that cell. There's I think I mentioned on the podcast before, one of the most pivotal moments for me. And Bruce Lipton is a very, very well-respected doctor and scientist. There's no doubt about Bruce's credibility. Again, fact check me all you like. Go online, have a look for yourself, please. He was the one that did the famous Petri dish test where he did the same genes in different blood. And then he determined that the information of the blood was actually influencing what it caused those cells to manifest as. So for example, one would manifest as tissue, another as bone, another as whatever.
Because of the environment. Environment's influence.
Yeah, so to break it down a little bit and to understand it is his understanding of our reality is actually that the micro and the macro are exact mirrors of each other, meaning that humans function on the earth as cells do within the human body. And he goes into it from a biological standpoint, and he talks about the operation of the cells and the neurons and how they interact with the body and connect. He says it's exactly the same mechanical process as humans on Mother Earth. And for us to take the next step forward consciously, it must be a unified conscious step. So Mother Earth must come together as humans come together in Mother Earth. I've done my best to explain that from a non-scientific standpoint, but it is, I think he covers it a little bit in the biology of belief, which I think, Hammy, you would find fascinating. I would love to get your take. But
I'll write that down.
Yeah, I actually saw that specific presentation in person, so I'm not 100% sure where you could find it, but I'm sure he's given other presentations.
He's got an 8-hour audible presentation. I think it's called the History of a Cell or the Evolution of a Cell or something like that on his website. I'm just fascinated because, like what we've spoke about with news information, dependent on there's so many different scientific studies or researchers or teachers, and however you research, it shapes how you perceive reality, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That's why it's so important that you're critical on yourself and that we have the ability to have cognition and to analyze things. That's what is critically important, I believe. But I don't believe that it's as simple as understanding this reality from the mind perspective, or the thinking mind's perspective, I think it's more dualistic in order to unify our understanding of reality, i.e. the heart and the mind and their interaction. Can allow you to see deeper through experiencing things as well as comprehending those things. That's the best I can put it into words, really.
Did
agree.
Any of your spiritual, like your Vipassanas and your ayahuascas, did any of them give you any experience in terms of like a spiritual experience?
The closest was ayahuasca.
When I say spiritual, I mean an awareness that there's something more than what's going on a day-to-day life. In our day-to-day life.
No transcendence, no hookup to anything external. No.
Well, okay.
Another
book?
Yeah, give us some.
I forget what exactly you said, but on what you were saying just before, Fletch, that you need a critical analysis, but the critical analysis will not provide you with everything. Like the mind can only go so far. I think it's important to have that awareness that the mind cultivates, but I'm open to the fact that there is other aspects to the world that I don't understand, and particularly not being able to have visuals. I think that I'm incredibly limited in what I can understand with that. So I trust my mind's understanding. And I think that the bike crash, the one thing that it changed, like I am the same person I was before in many respects, except for the one thing that I realized that my truth is everything. Like I died in that minute, and my truth was as it was, whether it be right or wrong, like right or wrong. The best phrase for me at the moment is that nothing is wrong. And like you can take that two ways, like everything's all right, or like there is literally no sense of wrong. Like there is no right or wrong, true or false. It is whatever truth you have in your mind. And I actually, before the accident, I thought I was like a bit of a numpty. Like I didn't have much understanding, comprehension. I always struggled with that in school and just brought it up by willpower. And I never believed in myself. But after the crash, I realized that it doesn't matter whether I'm right. To live it is the main thing, and that's the only that's the only thing. Well, not the only thing, but the biggest thing that I got from the crash is that to live your own truth, your own perspective, your own reality is the most important thing. I just wanted to. I think that like answered a couple of questions that have been asked, but we just never got around to answers there.
Yeah, that was answering very well the first question we asked in question number 67.
And you've got to realize that the reason I'm throwing all these questions out is because I'm loving this. I'm fascinated by this, because for someone else, let's say, you've had some incredible experiences. I mean, the fact that Dominique and Gabriel, you knew them, you know, that what the chances of them being right there when you had the accident, you know, how I would see that is there's a spiritual reason for that. It's not a coincidence, but you don't see it that way, which is fascinating. You know, it's amazing. It's been a great.
Yeah. It's a big thing, and it's that kind of thing. I think that a lot of people's perceptions are shaped by what they find to be convenient, and I find that very convenient, but I struggle to let that be taken into my belief. Like my belief is strictly on logic, on probability, on what is likely to be true. I can't justify that like the spirituality of that, like the coincidence of that is to me just coincidence. And I think like it's definitely different from most ways of I don't know, forming life, like the conglomerate of life into a perspective. It's definitely different. I'm stoked on I was speaking with Fletch and our mate Sarah about the human design theory. And one moment that as I was talking with them, I was kind of hesitant on my own perceptions. I'm like, am I drawn into like this coincidental, like, am I taking things on board because they're convenient for me, or am I actually doing higher order thinking and thinking them out? And a convenient, a nice realization for me was that the human design, by human design, my character is a reflector. A reflector. And that like answered so many questions for me. I'm like, oh my God, I could just stop everything right now and just live as that. Like, that's it. I'm happy. I'm content. But there's a part of me, there's a huge part of me that won't let that happen. I don't see the logic in it, and I'm investigating it further to be able to take it into my beliefs. But I realized that because I didn't take that on board, as convenient and as contenting as it would be, I still can't. I will keep going with the logical path.
Can I suggest a book?
Yeah.
It's called Human by Design by Greg Braden, who's a scientist, so it's a scientific book.
Human by Design.
To
pop that in before I forget.
It's called Human by Design by Greg Braden. I'm pretty sure he changed the name of it because it didn't sell very well because people didn't like the title. It's got a new name now, but you'll find it if you Google Human by Design. It's his latest book, the last book that he did. It's a fascinating book.
That sounds great.
On the human design, actually, you did say that you considered yourself weird, again with a positive connotation. Unique, Nick said. I say somewhere in the middle. And the reflector is actually considered to only make up 1% of the human population.
Wow.
So it was pretty cool that you were considered in that 1%. And I know Elisa, my cousin, who provides that human design stuff, found that very fascinating as well. She had never met a reflector.
What's a reflector? Can you explain a little bit?
I don't know a lot about human design, so I probably won't. I don't want to confuse people.
Did she explain much to you?
So by my readings, what I took on board from the readings, like it was a lot of external stuff in like the spiritual realm that I don't like associate too well with the meanings of. Yep. But in my understanding, it was essentially a reflector is someone who doesn't have a strong sense of self and will take on others' selves, like will take on the actions of others as their own, as reflections. So say I'm interacting with a tradie, I'll be a tradie. If I'm interacting with a teacher, I'll be a teacher, like in the internal sense of it. Like,
and that resonates. What was that, sorry? Resonate with you?
Yeah. You feel that?
No, I'm saying, does it resonate with you? Is that what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's been a struggle for me in the last year or so. Like I realized that I don't have a strong sense of self. And from that, I don't have, by my sense of the word, a strong ego reaction in interactions. So I struggle with interactions on a deeper level because that sense of self doesn't conflict where it needs to. It doesn't resonate as strongly as it needs to. So I've been trying to cultivate my own sense of self. And you could understand when I see that, I'm a reflector, I don't have a sense of self. No, that's just, I'm not born with it. Like, oh, okay, I don't need to do that. I don't need to cultivate my own sense of self. I don't need to go down that challenge. But I'm like, nah, let's give it a go anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
Fully taken on board.
If anyone does want to do the human design calculator, I believe the information, you can just search it on Google, human design calculator, and all the information you need to put in is your name, place of birth, date of birth, and time of birth. And the time of birth does need to be accurate. It can't be within, a certain few minutes. It should be what you were given on your birth certificate. So it's something cool you can do. But again, my approach to doing any of that stuff is what you've just said. It's giving you an understanding of, that's why I do that. That's why I do this. That's why it resonates. And when it
does work in a family dynamic as well. It's good to know your wife or your son, that it worked for me because I thought, wow, now I actually know how to nurture my son. You know what I mean? You understand why certain things.
And you can get consultations on it, which again, I would recommend because they're very fascinating and a lot more nuanced, a lot more specific to you. And again, be your own scientist. Be like, does that resonate? Doesn't it resonate? Because I know just even you saying the nature of what you interpret the reflector profile to be, I can feel a lot of people be like, oh yeah, I do that a lot. But a reflector is actually on a whole nother intensity. As you said, it's actually the sense of self, which is a reflector, rather than it just being a habit within you to kind of assimilate in a social situation. So yeah, give it a go.
I'm intrigued to see how you, what you think a solution is. What do you think we need to do as a species right now to get through what we're going through? Or does that not bother you at all?
Interesting. I think from your podcast, like serve all beings, like for the good of all beings, that is absolutely my ultimate aim, and I think what the world should aim towards. I think two steps. One is to limit triggers to the ego, limit the triggers to the ego so that people can get into step two, which is to be more conscious about their actions. I think just those two things would serve all beings, like make the world a better place.
You know, if there's someone watching this, Graham, I'm sorry, I was going to call you Hammy then.
Yeah, call me Hammy. Go for it. Try it out.
If someone's watching this and they say, oh my God, this guy sees the world exactly how I see the world, right? And I have struggled my whole life with trying to, get a grasp on reality and what have you. Would you be open for them to contact you for any time?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. If they're a weirder little unit as I am, I would love that. They're probably an exceptional person. I'd love to talk with them.
Okay. Maybe you and the reflectors can all meet up, the 1%.
The 1%, the new one.
We'll just all hang around not really being anyone. It'll be interesting.
What you said about the solution is how I understand the importance of human connection, which I think is where which is the source of a lot of problems, because it doesn't take much to take yourself out of your own suffering or your own inner dialogue to then get into someone else's suffering. And that's obviously the action of compassion, that loving understanding of what someone else is going through. And there's a plethora of ways that you can do that. So I just find it really fascinating that you can, I suppose, have in some respects a different, you're on the other side of the pole in terms of perhaps how I or Nick even sees the end of existence, if we can say that. But the solution in some respects is very akin to how I see the solution to the world that we face today, which I think is really refreshing, because I, again, think that the truth always prevails, whatever that truth is. And we can get so caught up in these little nuanced aspects, but really, again, the solution is very simple. So that was very refreshing to hear.
And also,
yeah, I think it all just comes from love. Like love is the reason that we're here. So it comes together like that.
Because you said you have a different perspective on what love is, but now you're saying that about love. I'd love to hear how you see love. What is love to you?
I think a lot of people see love as lust, as intimacy. When I struggled with the concept for a while, I was asking everyone. And one of my ex-girlfriends, that was the question that she asked everyone. Like, fantastic question. And so many varied responses. Like, everyone's is different. I struggle to define it simply. So I think to give a example is probably best.
For sure.
Yeah.
To love, I won't say partner, to love someone, to love anyone, an interchange. It's an interchange of love. It's like the currency, like an interchange of money. It's an interchange of love. So I will have my faults and the other person will accept and understand those faults. and they will provide kindness to me by making compensations, being considerate of those faults. And that is how they love me. They get a great feeling of love. They get a release of oxytocin. They feel love by offering that compassion and kindness. And it can only come from understanding. And what was the other one? Anyway, understanding, essentially. And I will do the same to them. I see their faults and I understand and accept their faults, and I offer them a compassion and consideration for their faults. And I love, that is how I love them. And it's so beautiful because they're getting something out of it, but I'm getting the most out of it by getting that feeling of love. It's like, it's the way around altruism. It is pure altruism. It is as pure as altruism gets, by you get that feeling, that release of oxytocin, that interaction of love. That is love to me.
I love that you just come from a different angle, but it's still the same.
Yeah.
It's still the same teaching, the love and
Sure.
understanding and things like that. And you know what, I'll be honest with you, it doesn't really matter. I think if there was a lot more hammies in the world would be a nicer place.
It'd just be a mirror because they'd all be reflecting each other.
Right. It's just a very bright world.
Yeah. Yeah, love is a very deep topic as well. And I actually heard a fascinating take on the common understanding of love, which most people generally mentally navigate towards their relationship with their significant other. But of course, what is that relationship? It's an agreement. And what does an agreement have? An agreement has agreements, which are conditions.
Obligations.
Yes, correct. Which I think are necessary. Don't get me wrong. Like I think about how I would, for example, like my girlfriend to act and how she would expect, I don't have a girlfriend, but how she would expect me to then act. Does that make sense? That's the agreement there. But I think that
it makes zero sense that you don't have a girlfriend, but the rest of it's spot on.
And yeah, yes, correct, Amy. But I think true love actually transcends that. So, and that can only be experienced through actually going through that process, which, yeah.
Well, there's different states of love. And
that's it.
The difference of what you're talking about, as I understand it, is one's unconditional, one's conditional.
That's correct. But I think conditional love is still
needed.
A deep experience of love, but the ultimate love is the transcendence of the conditions, and it's unconditional, which I believe is a progressive thing, meaning that it's experiential, and that happens over a period in my understanding of lifetimes.
But we can experience it every day in nature.
For sure, you can experience it in nature and meditation.
Because if we look deeply into nature, nature does serve selflessly. Doesn't want anything in return. There's no conditions on it.
Yeah. Other fascinating topics we could talk about, perhaps your experience with Brazilian girlfriends. I know that you would have learnt a lot in that as well. I'm only kidding.
I definitely have. It's like just interactions with partners, like, you know, the interaction, the obligations, the conditions. Like, it's an interaction of ego by my sense of the term, and it's like necessary and impossible to have any insight into it. Well, not impossible, but very, very easy to have insight into it in a partnership.
So have there been any moments in relationships or perhaps coming out of relationships? Because I know for me personally, there are probably experiences in my life that have given me the most insight, given me the catalyst for a lot of transcendence and a lot of, for lack of a better term, spiritual experiences. And I think there's things that are so valuable that you can only experience in an intimate relationship that you can't really experience elsewhere. So I don't know, does anything stand out as we're talking now that you'd like to share on your experience with relationships?
Are you in a relationship?
Yeah, I am. Yep. Take it. Sorry, ladies. Yeah, I am. And yes, Fletch, absolutely. There was 2 moments that this was a big hold up for me in defining love is that there were these two moments that I experienced like a fourth dimension, like an absolute transcendence. Like it's I think that is as close as I get to the feeling of a higher power. Like that was the transcendence into a fourth dimension. It was an insane feeling. And I was like, is this love? Is this what everyone's talking about when they say love? And like love's bandied about in such a like off the hip kind of way that I'm like, surely not. And I don't think it is. I think that the feeling that I felt was actually a sense like as close a touch of enlightenment. I think that that feeling is, I can reconcile that with a lot of the teachings that I read about enlightenment. And I think it was in my physiological, like infant understanding, to use your word there, Fletch, of enlightenment and physiology. I think it was just a complete contentment of like a saturation of oxytocin. And I think that enlightenment is that, to get that saturation of oxytocin from the environment that you're in, no matter the environment, then that is enlightenment to me at the moment by my infant grasp of it. And I only got that off one interaction, like, yeah, intimate interaction twice.
So before Nick capitulates first, I just want to ask, what were those specific moments? Are you talking about more the prolonged connection through the relationship, or are you talking about perhaps a specifically intimate moment in time with that partner? Because it's fascinating from an energetic perspective. You obviously have the two poles, the feminine and the masculine, and what's happening in a relationship and through moments of intimacy is a unification of them, which is actually, in my intellectual theoretical understanding of perhaps enlightenment, it is a unifying transcendent experience which can only happen through unification. So it makes sense to me that you say that you've experienced perhaps what you could perceive enlightenment to be written in books through unifying in some level with these partners. So to get back to my question, was it again prolonged through these relationships, or was there specific moments in time?
No, it was two little hit points, both when I was meditating on the relationship on a beach.
Right.
And it was just very brief moments of very brief feelings.
Yeah. Okay.
And it wasn't an intense relationship. Like, it wasn't prolonged relationship even. It was like a kind of, I don't know, 6 months into it, I guess. Had like, those moments of, feeling.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Hammy, but I'm listening to you, buddy, right? And
I know.
It's just jumping at me, right?
It's discordant. Yeah, okay. I get it. I understand.
Go.
You've just mentioned, right, fourth dimension, enlightenment. Then you said you believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, you believe that enlightenment is a chemical oxytocin that's brought on by an environment. I'm assuming an external environment, but then you finished by saying it was in states of meditation. So my question is, state of meditation surely must mean that it's from what you're doing internally. And although you said you don't necessarily believe in anything when you die or a higher consciousness, but what do you mean with terms like fourth dimension, experience of fourth dimension and enlightenment?
So I say fourth dimension for the reason that I can't perceive it. It was completely imperceivable. Like, it's like I can only perceive 3 dimensions. The fourth is imperceivable.
Oh.
What's that?
You are open to more states of consciousness than what you're currently experiencing.
Absolutely. Like I said with Fletcher's previous bit of discourse about how the mind can only go so far in understanding. Yes, the mind only goes so far. And I just don't seem to have the receptors for any more, but I think that there's heavy potential for there to be more, like other dimensions for sure.
Experienced in these experiences? You have experienced it more.
Those two hit points of feeling. Yeah, felt that fourth dimension. Yeah, I would term it, like I termed it love at the time, but then like I couldn't reconcile it with others' definitions. So I've kind of settled on enlightenment now, but I'm still unsure. Yeah, I've experienced it. I've experienced that a
But
couple of.
could fourth dimension, love, and enlightenment all be the same thing?
By human definition, no. Like I can't reconcile love, like by our definition that we bandy about in society. But enlightenment and fourth dimension, I could definitely say yes. They could easily be by our definitions, but it's all on definition, as I say. Like
But this comes back
people get sick of hearing that word.
This comes back to what we were saying early on about experience. Any definition of love is not love. Any definition of enlightenment is not enlightenment. The experience itself is love.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. And it's just theory when we're talking about it. And we spoken on the last podcast about moments of satori, which are little snippets of enlightenment.
But they're lost once you try and define them. Once you try and explain what the experience was, you'll never be able to define it, because as it's a great way of putting it, actually, because words, labels, explanations, and definitions are three-dimensional, whereas this is a state beyond that.
Yep.
Would you say that's
yeah, well done. Yeah, I would, for sure.
Does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. Spot on. 100%.
Is there anything else you want to share with us? Anything that you think the listener will benefit from, or any cool stories, anything you want to get out?
Absolutely. Another thing that I was just ruminating on from the what would better the world. I think to let go of ego triggers as triggered by ego, so that we can go into a consciousness that separates our actions from our basically separating our actions from our stimulus, so response, like lengthening response time, being more aware of our responses. I think that one of the biggest ego drives, I just got to stop saying the word. One of the biggest drives for us as humans is to have interaction, to have human interaction is so concentrated and potent in the way that it gives us connection. But I think if more people were able to experience connection in nature, then a lot of our negative actions, a lot of our detrimental actions to the world and society would be mitigated. To be able to experience, it's not as concentrated, the connection with nature. Like growing up in nature, being a farmer for most of my life, I do have a connection with nature, and it's not as concentrated as the connection with humans can be that I see in others. But I think it's a purer way of living, is to get that release, that oxytocin, that connection with nature. I think that if I could help anyone in any way, it would be to let them have a connection with nature, because it just makes for such a more wholesome and easy way of living, more contented.
Because we are a part of nature, and that most people's lifestyle now is a separation from nature. So would you suggest that even if you're living in the city and you're not surrounded by trees or water, would you suggest making the effort to maybe once a week getting in a natural environment?
Absolutely. And just talking about anyone with nature, to have an understanding of nature is to have a connection with nature. So you see farmers, they know what trees, what's happening with the trees at what times of the year, and that understanding is a connection. So if they can't even get out to nature to talk about someone and to be able to understand nature, ideally to get out in nature. Yeah
It's so funny because everyone we've had on, which is only a few people, says the same thing. And I personally believe it's so important. And you see people going mad in the cities and in the country as well. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, I was just speaking to two friends actually. We went on a nature walk and it's like, how'd you feel? They're like, oh mate, it's the best thing ever. I'm going to do it every weekend now. I'm like, why do you think you feel so good? He's like, oh, just away from your phone, like away from your blah, blah, blah. I was like, don't overcomplicate it. You know what I mean? Like, you don't even have to answer the question, but it literally is tried and tested and proven again and again. If you spend time in nature, you feel much more at peace within yourself. It's really, really important. So to finish that, no wonder you feel anxious sitting in front of a computer screen all day inside a space with carpet and gyprock walls and paints and chemicals. No wonder. You know, it's not rocket science, in my humble opinion.
That's why I think people like Wim Hof do so well, because my last birthday, my wife got me in one day. I went for an infrared sauna, which I like. I went for a float tank, which I enjoyed. The cryo spa, you know, when they put the nitric oxide and they freeze you. I did one of them, and I went in a salt room. And I had a great insight. And the insight was that it was all nice, but it's technology that's trying to mimic nature. And if you look at people like Wim Hof, he basically gets people out in the environment, in the cold environment, out. So you're not just in, you know, a float tank might be full of magnesium and is pulling toxins out your body. But if you go and lie in the ocean or you go surfing or whatever, you're getting the actual flow and the life force of the ocean, as long with the magnetism of the earth and things like this. You know, if you just get in a sweat tank, a sweat lodge, everything is about just returning to nature. And this is why everybody has such incredible experiences with people like Wim. I think that's why he's successful.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Yeah, so perhaps solutions moving forward, as you said for the benefit of all beings, and also immersing nature, or allowing nature to integrate back into our lives now, which we've, for whatever reason, separated ourselves from as society and civilization has progressed. I think for me anyway, the two that you've mentioned, I can't think of anything more important than those two things.
That's it, eh?
Yeah. So unless you have any other questions, that might be a good place to leave it. But
I'm happy to leave it, but I would love to just ask one more. I would like to just, have you ever, I'm assuming, you know, you've spent, as you say, you spent a lot of time farming in nature. Have you had any experiences where you've really felt a deep connection, or like any type of oneness with the nature, with the environment, just being you in nature? Has there been any type of experience that has made you feel deeply connected to the world around you?
Yeah, like it's pretty constant. It's whenever I don't have stress in me. If I have stress in me, I can't feel the same connection that I usually do. But usually it's, you know, you look at the leaves fluttering in the breeze, and it's that kind of feeling that you get a sense of peace. But if there's stress there, it doesn't happen. There's always, I don't know to what degree of connection. Some people might have a higher sense of oneness, higher sense of connection, but I'm contented with the connection that I feel. I feel like it could be higher. That's why I say it's a diluted version of connection, rather than human connection is very concentrated. Like even for me, I see it much more concentrated in others, but the sense that I get with nature is diluted. It's a diluted connection, but it's a wholesome one, and it's always there. It's not reliant on anything. It's always there.
What do you mean by diluted, if you don't mind me asking?
That sense of connection that you feel, like you might feel a sense of connection with some people over others. And this is me. I feel a sense of connection with some on a lower end of the scale, and then with others on a higher end of the scale. And that's what I mean is diluted. It's down here with a lower intensity of connection in nature is what I experience. But sometimes, like if there's no stress, then it gets higher.
So when you say the stress, we're going back to the whole neocortex and time, ego thing. The stress, obviously, I'm assuming, gets the thinking mind going. So there's a separation from
nature.
From nature.
Um,
Not what do you mean when you say you're in stress? What do you mean?
It's a frustration, like a flutter. I'm in a flutter. I'm not still. I'm elevated heart rate. I'm probably sweating. I'm jittery. That kind of, like, physiologically, I would imagine a release of cortisol. In the mind, this is the thing that I don't have, a, like, kind of those senses of self. It's very much like I'm aware of the elevated heart rate, sweating, jitteriness. That's my stress.
Yeah, and just on that, that interrupts the flow or the ability to fully connect with what is around you, with nature or the nature.
For sure.
Also focusing on yourself as well.
Yeah, and there's an internal focus on the thinking mind, or, as you said, other elements, the frustration, whether that be physiological or mental. Yeah. So again, that hinders your ability to see things as they are, which is without our labels and without our mental impressions put on them.
I'm happy.
He's happy. That's big. I reckon we strike while the iron's hot and let.
Yeah, if he's happy, he's always happy. I never see you sad.
I would like to say thank you because obviously you reached out to us, and this is the first time we've really spoke properly. Fletcher, obviously, speaks very highly of you. I knew you'd had a bike accident, and I didn't really know where the conversation was going to go, but I really enjoyed that, and I felt like I could speak to you all day. So I appreciate you coming on, Graham. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, mate. I love it. It was fantastic to be able to share my perspective. I knew it was going to conflict, and I really appreciate that you shared yours and taken mine on board.
I don't think it was conflicting. I just think it's a different. Different perspective, but the same solution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Well done, mate. You survived, and I enjoyed it very much. So thanks for coming on. And thank you everyone for that watched. And I've been told to say subscribe if you like the videos, and do leave a comment if there's anything you want us to cover. If there's anyone you want us to interview, Nick and I are willing to interview pretty much anyone, to be honest.
And if the 1% want to reach out to you, Graham, do you want to share how people can get hold of you?
Yeah, I don't know how's best. Maybe Instagram, Facebook.
What is it?
Instagram's avobroham. Like, I'll put it up. Maybe put it up in the comments, Fletch.
Well, yeah, for sure. If you want me to do that, if not, they can email us and we can pass it on, whatever you're comfortable with. But can you just clarify what your Instagram name is?
Avobroham.
Avobroham. I thought Avogroham. Right. Okay.
No, Avobro, because I've got a brother. So we're Avobros by my definition. He's, I don't know, not too keen on it, but whatever.
Your avocados are huge, aren't they? That's amazing.
Yeah, they are massive.
You've got it down pat, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Nice.
Yeah.
So if you want avocados, you can go in there.
All right, mate. We'll have
reach out.
Have a great rest of your day.
Oh,
and
nice.
Yep, we will speak again very soon.
Thanks, boys. Really appreciate it.
Love.